Okay, sorry about that. So this presentation is a joint effort between myself and Hassan Zuberi, a volunteer with the EFCL's Planning and Development Committee. We are also joined by Jenny Gurnett, another staff member of the EFCL, and she'll be with us in just a few moments. So we do have a stacked session for you today. We'll be covering the basics of the zoning bylaw renewal and talking about the most salient points from the three of the 4 discussion papers, which will include nodes and corridors, climate change, and small business. We've elected to omit information about special area zones, just because based on our analysis, there isn't too much in there that will be of immediate interest to the majority of community leagues. But with that said, if you are interested in learning more about special area zones, I invite you to check out the full paper on the Engage Edmonton platform. But before we begin, I want to stress that at this point, the zoning bylaw renewal is still very much in an exploratory phase, and that the items we discussed today from the discussion papers are not yet determined as outcomes. So this means there's still opportunity for you to provide feedback. So if something flags for you as being interesting, exciting, or concerning about any of the proposals, you should absolutely provide feedback on the Engage Edmonton platform and bring the information to your league for further discussion. It's also important to note that this session is meant to serve as a summary of the discussion papers, so there's really not enough time to hit everything. But again, if something strikes you as needing further analysis, I invite you to read the full papers. And finally, I want to make sure that you understand that the content of these presentations was derived directly from the City of Edmonton's discussion papers on the topic and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the EFCL or the EFCL's Planning and Development Committee. So with that said, I want to begin by going over a few housekeeping items and explaining how your engagement in this session is going to work. So to begin, the session is being recorded. So if you're not comfortable with appearing on a recording, I invite you to keep your camera off. I see the majority of you do have them off anyhow. And the second being that for the duration of the presentation, all participants will remain on mute. With that said, questions about the content are bound to arise. And even though I've become very closely acquainted with the discussion papers, I'm still no expert. So what I'd like you to do is post whatever questions that come up for you in the group chat, and we'll park them there. And at the end of the session, I will compile all of the questions into a master copy, including the questions from the session that occurred on Wednesday. And then they'll all be answered and sent out to participants within the next few days. Fortunately, I was able to pare down some of the content for Wednesday, and we will have time following each discussion paper for some small group conversation. So when you're assigned to your breakout rooms, your microphones will be enabled and your web cameras will be enabled so that you can chat with other participants. And I just ask that you be respectful of other participants and the moderator in your room, which includes staying on topic and ensuring that other folks in your room have a chance to speak. And finally, following the session, you'll receive an information package that includes the questions and answers, relevant links, the PowerPoint presentation, and the session recording. And you can expect that by the middle of the upcoming week. So with that said, if you do find following the session that you would like to learn more, share your thoughts, or participate in discussion, you can go to the Engage Edmonton platform that I will be referencing quite a bit throughout this presentation. I have just included the link here for your reference and for those folks unable to attend the session today, but who will still be looking at the PowerPoint slides. So what is the purpose of this session anyways? The first is obviously to raise awareness about the zoning bylaw renewal initiative. The second is to share engagement opportunities. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, to explain the purpose and the content of the recently released discussion papers. So let's jump right in. Before we do get into the content of the discussion papers, I just want to provide a very brief overview of the zoning bylaw and why the renewal project is being undertaken. I do strongly encourage you to read the overview and philosophy discussion papers available on the Engage Edmonton platform to learn more about this project, because there's just so much background info and there really isn't enough time to provide you with all that context. So the zoning bylaw contains the rules and regulations for the development of land in Edmonton. For the purpose of land development, the city is divided into zones, and the zone that a particular property is located on determines what can be built on that property. In Edmonton, the zones are loosely classified as residential, commercial, industrial, urban services, agricultural, direct control, and special area. However, the upcoming renewal will include rethinking how, what, and why the city regulates in terms of zoning and land development. But why the need for the renewal anyhow? So the current bylaw has not been substantially updated since 2001. And in 2001, this was largely a consolidation effort designed to harmonize 5 different land use bylaws. The last significant overhaul actually occurred in 1961. So now, 60 years later, many development regulations that were designed for a small prairie city of the 1960s are still shaping the built form of what is now Canada's fifth largest city in 2020. So for those of you familiar with city zoning processes and just looking at the list of some of the participants, I know many of you are, you'll know that the bylaw has been amended many, many times in the last several years. So taken together, these numerous amendments show that the bylaw is not meeting market demand in the city. There are a few features of the current bylaw that can be grouped into broad categories of why it's probably time to take another look at it and renew it. The first is that the current bylaw does not support compact, mixed-use, and sustainable development. Mixed-use development generally means the blending of different uses, such as residential and commercial, either within the same building or within the same development. A good example of a mixed-use street in Edmonton is 104th Street off Jasper Ave. In this view here, we can see this building features commercial ground floor, which is home to a really nice little restaurant. And then above, we have office space, and in the building over, we have residential units. This style of development provides for a variety of complementary and integrated uses that are walkable and within a given neighborhood or development project. Other amenities and services on this street include restaurants, cafes, small shops, and art installations. There's also excellent access to the LRT system and major bus routes along Jasper Ave. It's also important to note that mixed-use development can be vertical in nature or horizontal in nature. So vertical development is like what we just saw, where the building combines different uses in the same building, and horizontal combines single-use buildings in a range of land uses within one block. The second reason why it's probably time to renew the bylaw is that the current bylaw keeps activities separated from each other, meaning that communities like the street that we just saw, where housing, businesses, recreation, and employment centers are all easily accessible, are actually really rare in the city. Conventional zoning has, over decades of use, tended to isolate low-density residential from all other types of development. This makes it difficult, if not impossible, to walk from home to purchase even a container of milk in some instances. Separation of uses has also reduced the efficiency of public transportation, and travel by personal automobile has become the default because it is usually just so much more efficient than traveling by bus or LRT. The third is that the current zoning bylaw places a huge administrative burden on businesses opening and growing in Edmonton. The way the current bylaw is written can even prevent businesses from opening up at all because the current regulations lack the adaptability necessary to accommodate new and emerging business types. We'll discuss some of these barriers in a bit more detail later in the presentation when we talk about the economy and how the bylaw might be better able to support local business. And finally, the current bylaw can be used as an exclusionary tool to control certain segments of the population or business types under the guise of protectionism. So how will the new bylaw be different? The new bylaw will attempt to correct those features that I just spoke about by introducing a hybrid bylaw. So this means moving away from strictly conventional use-based zoning that separates uses from one another to a more hybrid approach that incorporates form, performance, and incentive zoning, while retaining use-based zoning for simple development like constructing a shed in your backyard. In doing so, the zoning bylaw will attempt to foster quality environments through a shift from focusing only on the separation of land uses to paying a little bit more attention to the built form and how buildings interact with the public realm. We won't spend too much time discussing performance-based or incentive-based zoning today, aside from a few small examples later on, but I will include information about these zoning types in the information package I send out to you following the session. Instead, I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about form-based zoning. So the current system of conventional zoning was essentially devised to prevent undesirable juxtapositions like factories next to homes and really incompatible scales of development. Separating incompatible land use makes sense when we're talking about things like heavy industrial next to people's homes, but there are many diverse land uses that are actually quite compatible, and separating them can be harmful to communities, including the creation of urban sprawl, which costs the taxpayer enormously and forces the majority of us to drive everywhere we need to go. Form-based codes, on the other hand, offer a new way of thinking about development regulations. They act as design guidelines and address the relationship between building facades and the public realm, the form and mass of buildings in relation to one another, and the scale and types of streets and blocks. Whereas in conventional zoning, there isn't a lot prescribed for how the building needs to act or interact with the street. What I'm going to do is a short video for you that helps illustrate what a form-based code is and how it differs from conventional zoning. I'd like you to pay attention to how streets are transformed from somewhat bleak and lifeless places into more active and visually interesting places by using regulations that prescribe how a building should actually interact with the street. So I'm just going to pull this up here. It comes from the Form-Based Codes Institute. And Hassan, can you just give me a nod if you can see it on your screen? Good? Okay. So the form of our towns and cities affects the quality of our lives. The facades of buildings should welcome people, not repel them. Buildings should contribute to the public realm, not hide from it. Great streets happen when road and building designs are matched. Small towns can be revitalized by building on their original form. How we regulate urban forms shapes the lives of our communities. All right, so I apologize if that was a little bit grainy, but I think that video does a good job of showing the way that form-based zoning differs from conventional zoning and showing how a form-based code can help places that were planned under conventional zoning really transform. So the new zoning bylaw will also feature fewer, more enabling zones. So this means that it will allow a range of built forms and uses in most standard zones. And when I refer to uses, I'm referring to things like residential uses such as houses or apartment buildings and commercial uses such as cafes or grocery stores. Single function zones will be reserved for the highest risk uses that have the potential for greater land use impacts, such as heavy industrial uses. The new zoning bylaw will also expand use classes. So the current bylaw has 127 different land uses. Combining uses will result in groups of broader categories, which will allow for a greater range of activities to occur in a particular building. And finally, the new zoning bylaw will also feature fewer regulations and thus less control. Overall, the new bylaw will create a much more permissive environment for development in the city. So that is it for background information. So what exactly are these discussion papers I keep referring to? Essentially, the papers have been released by the city to allow residents to explore various aspects of zoning. These papers provide the preliminary thinking and direction for the new bylaw's regulatory framework. However, even though these papers are written in very accessible language, they are still quite long, hence why we're hosting these webinars. And again, I want to stress that the discussion papers are exploratory and that outcomes have not yet been determined. The city is still seeking input on the options outlined in each of the papers. So as I mentioned before, if you're particularly moved by a certain proposal, it's important to start providing feedback now. So the papers are being released in the batches visible on the screen with the opportunity to provide feedback through the Engage Edmonton platform on this current batch until September 18th. I will now turn it over to Hassan, who will spend some time talking about the Nodes and Corridors paper.
Hello, everyone. So the first paper we will talk about is a paper that discusses the concept of nodes and corridor planning. Nodes are defined as areas where people and transportation routes converge. These nodes provide opportunities for residential, employment, retail, and recreation. Corridors work on a similar philosophy, but are laid out linearly along important transportation routes. Corridors also serve to connect nodes to each other. So the next slide. The Zoning Bylaw Renewal is directly informed by the City of Edmonton's strategic plan called Connect Edmonton, and the Draft City Plan, which will be the City of Edmonton's new municipal development plan when it's when it is approved. Both of these documents are designed to address how people experience and engage with our city, and the new zoning bylaw is essentially the teeth of these documents. It is the how we achieve the goals of Connect Edmonton and the city plan. Nodes and corridors are envisioned in the new city plan as being the activity centers with a mix of housing types, employment, and business opportunities. The system of corridors connect the nodes to one another, creating places for movement, living, and commerce that are anchored by pedestrian-friendly streets that are well-designed, high-quality urban spaces. The next slide, yeah. The city plan concept identifies nodes and corridors as intensification areas designated for housing and job growth, which are characteristic of a mix of uses supporting a variety of businesses, housing types, and community amenities. Based on this direction, nodes and corridors are intended to support 50% of all employment in Edmonton and serve as hubs for residents to connect. The land use concept proposed by the draft city plan includes a hierarchy of nodes and corridors to direct growth of varying intensities to different areas of the city. These include city center node, which is downtown, major nodes, district nodes, primary corridors, and secondary corridors. And now we will dive into that. What are all these? So shown in a large red circle on the map, a major node is a large-scale urban center that serves multiple districts and is typically anchored by public institutions and significant employment centers. Major nodes capitalize on excellent transit access and support higher density development with a wide mixture of land uses. From this map, we can see that areas like the University Ave and University and the Millwoods Town Center are envisioned as major nodes. So the next is shown in a smaller golden circle on the map is a district node. District node is diverse and includes housing, employment, and amenities, often within a short walk or bike ride from other parts of the district. District node supports a variety of businesses and community amenities, serving multiple neighborhoods. And from this map, we see places like Century Park and Bonnie Doon as being envisioned as a district node. Moving on to the next is our primary corridor. So primary corridors are basically the red lines on the map you can see. These are the vibrant and prominent urban street designed for living, working, and moving. It serves as a destination in itself, but also provides critical connections throughout the city and beyond. Primary corridors include a wide range of activities supported by mixed-use development and mass transit. From this map, we see places like White Ave and Stony Plain Road being envisioned as primary corridors. Moving on to the next is the secondary corridor, which is shown as a gold line. So secondary corridor is the vibrant residential and commercial street that serves as a local destination for surrounding communities. A secondary corridor feels more residential in nature than primary corridors. Some secondary corridors will include citywide mass transit, with others served by district transit. So the new zoning bylaw can direct and manage growth along the new nodes and corridors by creating regulations around these 5 concepts. Inclusive mixed-use zone is the first one. The second one is the integration of mobility networks. And then we have high-quality urban design, and then the innovation corridor concept and district planning. And now we'll dive into each one of these. So the current zoning bylaw lacks effective mixed-use zones. Up until now, there has been an emphasis on providing access for automobiles, which has led development to focus on providing parking spaces. This focus has taken away opportunities to develop sites that support the people who shop, work, and live along these commercial streets. As we discussed before, current commercial zoning is more focused on controlling land use activities and less so on how the building interacts with the environment around it. The new zoning bylaw has a role in creating a more permissive environment for mixed-use development by ensuring that the nodes and corridor zones enable a variety of residential, commercial, institutional, cultural, and recreational uses. So the regulations in the new bylaw can also inform the composition of dwellings and can support directions to increase housing options in the nodes and corridors. Moving on to the second, it's the integration with mobility networks. The nodes and corridor concept builds on previous policy work related to transit-oriented development and expands it from being centered on LRT station and transit centers to where intensification opportunities intersect with mass transit and mobility hubs. The nodes and corridors are intended to link to each other to enable efficient and enjoyable movement of people and goods in tandem with the growth of mobility networks over time. The new zoning bylaw can also help achieve high quality urban design through the use of regulations that ensure the design of buildings and sites are contextually appropriate and enhance the pedestrian experience in all seasons. The zoning bylaw can also support the innovation corridor concept. The innovation corridor concept is basically a linear strip within a heart of the city where major academic, health, and research institutions are connected by mass transit and supported by high quality urban design. The new zoning bylaw can advance policies related to enhancing and redeveloping these areas by integrating broader range of uses to encourage innovative business models and operations. Finally, there's district planning. So district planning will be translated in the direction of the draft city plan into 15 geographic areas and the nodes and corridors within them to accommodate growth. So a district plan is a collection of neighborhoods that provide a range of destinations, services, and amenities like grocery stores, parks, cafes, centers, rec centers, health centers, schools, and workplaces. As such, the proposed node and corridor zones of the new zoning bylaw will need to align with policies within the district plan to achieve this objective. So we are told by the administration that district planning is underway, and the objective is that the district plans should be in place in 2022 at the time of the adoption of the new zoning bylaw. So it's a couple of years to implement that. The three zones that are proposed to achieve nodes and corridor concepts are the mixed-use zone, MU1, MU2, and the comprehensive site zone. So within the first mixed-use zone, it's going to be the main street and is pedestrian priority zone centered around transit accessibility. So this zone will be located primarily within urban settings, pedestrian-oriented corridors, and within some suburban contexts. The second is the mixed-use zone 2, MU2 zone. This zone differs from the first in that this zone is intended to transition larger automobile-oriented sites to mixed-use pedestrian-friendly development that intensifies in close proximity to mass transit. This zone will also prioritize pedestrian movement, safety, and activity, and the provision of buildings at a comfortable scale for pedestrians. And finally, the third one is the comprehensive site zone. This zone is intended to transition large retail centers, shopping malls, and sites greater than 2 hectares into high density, mixed use urban villages in close proximity to mass transit. So as you can imagine, increasing density in key places will be paramount to realize the concept of nodes and corridors. So each zone will prescribe a height permissible on a site, whether it is for low, medium, or high-rise development, with those heights shown in the infographic on the screen. The nodes and corridor concept will dictate the intensity of the development. For example, a major node such as the one at Millwood Town Center would feature mid and high-rise buildings, whereas a district node such as the one at the Bonnie Doon Mall would feature mid-rise and some high-rise buildings. Additionally, a primary corridor will feature mid-rise and some high-rise, and a secondary corridor will feature a low-rise and mid-rise. To ensure that there is adequate buffer space between buildings of differing intensities, transitions between buildings will be applied within the proposed nodes and corridor zones. Taller buildings are proposed to be concentrated at major intersections and in close proximity to mobility hubs. However, as development moves further away from these local points, the scale of development will decrease to serve as a transition into lower density areas. To realize the nodes and corridor concept, where main streets are vibrant pedestrian-oriented places, there will be requirements for how ground floor commercial development interacts with the street. So for example, active frontage requirements will be implemented to ensure there is active visual engagement between the street life and the uses on the ground floor of the buildings. If you can see in the column on the left, we see two images that show interactive, visually appealing streets. And in the column images on the right, we see passive streets with no active frontage. The goal of new zoning bylaw will be to promote main streets that mirror the lively images in the left-hand column. So to achieve high standard of design that contributes to an enhanced public realm envisioned in the nodes and corridor concept, administration proposes to integrate regulations that reflect the principles of connected, walkable, and winter city-friendly designs. This will be achieved through guidance for buildings that strengthen the relationship with the street and promote home-and-scale development that is comfortable for the pedestrian. Another important proposal is the potential use of incentive-based regulations in nodes and corridor areas. It is proposed that additional height, floor area ratio, or dwelling units can be permitted under certain conditions, provided that standardized public amenity contributions are provided. So more information about a standardized public amenity contribution can be found in the full paper on the Engage Edmonton platform. So Stephanie, do you want to take over from here, or?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Hassan. So that concludes our section on nodes and corridors, and it's time for our first group discussion. So what I'm going to do is randomly assign you to groups, and you'll have about 8 or 9 minutes to discuss the questions that are on the screen, which I'll also share in the chat because you won't have access to the screen during the group discussion. And I just want to note that this portion of the presentation will not be shared outside of these group discussions, so feel free to be very candid and honest. So the questions, I want you to think about how COVID has changed the way many of us interact with our city. I thought it would be interesting for you to discuss some of the challenges and subsequent changes you've personally implemented, given that we aren't supposed to be moving around too much. Or alternatively, what changes you haven't been able to implement because of the way the city is laid out. So following that, maybe we'll talk a little bit about what considerations the city will need to take into account in the face of our new reality that could help facilitate some of these changes on a wider scale, and how nodes and corridors can support our new reality and what might require a little bit more attention. So I am going to put you into breakout rooms in just one moment. All right, everyone, welcome back. So what next? First of all, I want to invite you to share your questions with us in the chat. As I mentioned earlier, questions will be compiled and answered over the course of the next several days, which will then be sent back to you in the form of an FAQ. And the Engage Edmonton platform features all of the full papers, surveys, and a forum to share your comments and thoughts on the nodes and quarters proposals. And you can also begin talking to your league about these proposals and share engagement opportunities with your membership. Okay, so the second paper we'll discuss is the paper outlining climate change and the ways the new zoning bylaw can help achieve policy goals outlined in other overarching documents. So as we're probably all aware, there are numerous implications for Edmonton in the face of a rapidly changing climate. These are more frequent and intense weather events such as heavy rainfall and drought due to changing atmospheric conditions, the increased likelihood of urban flooding events affecting our homes and businesses, which is that it will almost double by 2050. And Edmonton will be warmer and drier overall, which may lead to extreme heat implications for vulnerable populations like seniors. Today's forested and parkland ecosystems will be gradually replaced by more grassland ecosystems. And as ecosystems change and trees become stressed, the risk of more invasive species and wildfire will increase. More water will be needed to maintain existing urban trees, which are effective at reducing heat within cities, and different landscaping requirements will be required in a new climate, including the need for more low-impact development designs. So while it may seem odd to folks not too familiar with planning and development, the zoning bylaw can actually be a very effective tool for addressing some of the climate challenges facing Edmonton. In particular, the new zoning bylaw can use regulations or incentives for new and renovated buildings to be built or renovated to a zero emissions standard. It can create opportunities to generate renewable energy on site. It can mandate better neighborhood design to help people get to work, access services, and enjoy amenities that are within 15 minutes of where they live. It can protect our natural systems by maintaining and enhancing existing natural areas, providing more natural space within the city, and improving our urban tree canopy. And finally, the new bylaw can help Edmonton adapt to climate change impacts by housing rules for the design, regulation, and maintenance of low-impact development designs, green infrastructure, and for buildings that can withstand and reduce impacts that are expected to occur due to climate change. So the concept of low-impact development gets mentioned quite frequently in this paper as an action that can help Edmonton become a more climate-resilient city. So what I'm going to do, instead of trying to explain what low-impact development is to you, I'm going to play a short video for you out of a municipality in Ontario that implemented some of these designs to give you a better idea of what low-impact development actually means.
And fewer natural green spaces. Before neighborhoods were built, rain and snowmelt or stormwater was naturally absorbed into the ground. The stormwater fed trees and vegetation, which filtered pollutants from the water, releasing it into our rivers, groundwater, and eventually into Lake Simcoe. With hard surfaces, the stormwater cannot soak into the ground, causing floods and carrying pollutants directly into our rivers. To solve this problem, Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority is working with municipalities and developers in our watershed to promote low-impact development, or LID, a technique that mimics how stormwater is handled naturally. In partnership with the authority, the town of Newmarket began building an LID demonstration project on Forest Glen Road, close to an area that was particularly prone to floods.
On our conventional roads, water is collected when it rains into our catch basins, and the catch basins bring the water through a pipe system called storm sewers, and the storm sewers discharge into our creeks and our rivers and our lakes. On this particular project, we're doing things differently. Instead of catch basins, we have curb cuts in our curb line, and the rainwater flows through the curb cuts into bioswales. The bioswales contain enhanced plantings that remove some of the pollutants from the rainwater that's collected. The water then filters through a biomedia layer of soils and then is collected again into a gravel layer at the bottom. The total effect is that the water is really slowed down considerably and is kept closer to the source where it fell onto the ground, rather than being driven directly into our lakes and rivers.
It was important that residents on Forest Glen Road were happy and on board. We held a series of public meetings so residents could provide feedback on road design and be updated on the progress of the project.
This low-impact development is an exciting project, not only for the town of Newmarket, but the Lake Simcoe Conservation Authority. This is a way for us to deal with water where it lands on site. It'll help reduce our infrastructure investment, and it's creating an innovative approach to a problem that every municipality is going to be seeing as we talk about intense and more frequent rainstorm events.
Forest Glen is a great partnership between ourselves and the town of Newmarket. It's a new way of treating stormwater runoff, which is a serious problem across the watershed. These projects are all part and parcel of a bigger program the authority's trying to deliver across the watershed, where we're looking at improving the overall health and quality of Lake Simcoe and its tributaries. This project specifically with respect to Western Creek will reduce those flood volumes and it will improve water quality. So we'll see a major benefit within the health and quality of that catchment area.
Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority is supporting LID projects like Forest Glen.
All right, so sorry, it sounds like it might have gotten a little bit laggy, but I can include the link to that video in the package that I send you following this session. Okay, so Edmonton has a variety of policy documents that will provide guidance and direction for the zoning bylaw renewal where climate change is concerned. And these include, of course, the draft city plan, the strategic plan, getting to 1.5, the energy transition strategy, and climate resilient Edmonton. So I don't want to eat up a ton of our time together listing off every proposal that the paper proposes as being able to advance the directives outlined, but I've included them on this slide and in the on the next slide as well, in the event you choose to review the slides at a later time. So as you can see, there are many proposals outlined in this paper, and if the topic area is particularly interesting to you, again, I encourage you to read more about the proposals in the climate change paper on the Engage Edmonton platform. But perhaps most importantly, what mechanism will be used to ensure these actions get implemented? The paper outlines a proposal for developing a development permit point system as a possible method for implementing some of these proposed actions. So in this system, each type of climate action would be assigned a specific point value based on a variety of factors, including effectiveness, cost, or complexity. So instead of regulating or mandating that a green roof or solar panels be required for every single development, different types of developments would be required to achieve a set number of points. So for example, developments in Minneapolis that apply the standard are required to achieve a total of 10 points in any combination. So developers would then be able to choose the most suitable actions for their development based on their analysis, and regulations could be based on a measurable target or outcome and would not necessarily dictate the method or technology to achieve the specific action. And point values could be adjusted as conditions, targets, and priorities change over time. And perhaps most importantly, assigning higher point values to priority actions would ensure that the overall point system aligns with Edmonton's priorities. So how climate actions are incorporated into the new bylaw will be crucial in determining its success in contributing to the city's energy transition and adaptation goals. However, the paper notes that not all of the proposals will be adopted, and the ones that are adopted will likely be adopted in phases. So there are a number of factors that will influence the proposed timing of implementing the different actions. The first being the number of co-benefits. So essentially, the greater the number of actions that a proposed zoning action could contribute towards, the stronger the case that the action could be implemented. And I won't spend too much time going into the other proposals, but interestingly, the paper also recognizes that given COVID, the interest in climate action may decrease or be a lower priority within the city, businesses, and households because of real or perceived affordability challenges in our current economic state. So solutions will likely need to be cost effective in that case. But I do want to stress that politicians may need to hear from their constituents that climate action is still a priority for them if it is in fact a priority for you. So that concludes kind of our rapid fire round around the climate change paper. So for our next round of discussion, I thought it would be interesting to dig into the ways in which the pandemic has caused a dramatic reduction in our carbon output globally. A large driver of that reduction has been more and more people working from home, resulting in fewer cars on the road and less planes in the sky. So I just want to give you maybe 5 or 6 minutes to discuss what your impressions of this are and how the new bylaw can better encourage and support new ways of working. Similar to last time, I will break you into rooms and I'll give you a note when you've got about 2 minutes, and then the system will give you a note when you've got about 1 minute. And again, I want to stress the importance of making space for everyone in your discussion groups to be able to have a chance to share your thoughts. So I will do that right now for you. All right, welcome back everyone. So the session is technically supposed to end in about 3 minutes, but I just need 5 minutes more of your time, and I will get through the most important points from the final paper we'll be discussing, which is the paper on economy and supporting small business. So how can the zoning bylaws support Edmonton's local economy through supporting small business? Small business employ 74% of Albertans, and there are almost 32,000 small businesses in Edmonton, which accounts for about 94% of Edmonton's total businesses. In short, small businesses are important. They help create vibrant communities, support local employment, and improve the quality of life for Edmontonians through active, resilient, and exciting local commercial main streets and commercial areas in the city. So currently, Edmonton's zoning bylaw doesn't easily accommodate new and innovative business trends. So I want you to imagine that there's a warehouse sitting empty for several years near your community. And imagine that it's a bit run down, maybe the grass doesn't get mowed as often as it should, maybe the grass is brown, there's a broken window or two, and an enterprising entrepreneur comes around and decides they would like to purchase the warehouse and convert it so it can accommodate a microbrewery, a cafe, some office space, and a retail shop or two. In order to do that, the underlying zone where this warehouse was would need to allow for each of these use classes. And recall that when we were talking about use classes earlier, we've heard that many of them are very narrowly defined, and a permit would need to be issued for each of these activities. A rezoning application would also likely be involved. As you can imagine, this would be costly and time-consuming, and it may prevent the entrepreneur from going through with their vision, leaving the warehouse to sit vacant and empty and in disrepair instead of being a productive place utilized by members of the community. However, it's important to note that one benefit of a rezoning application to realize a multi-use business like this is that it requires pretty extensive consultation with the community. And while we don't know how community consultation is being dealt with in the new zoning bylaw, it's certainly something the EFCL will be keeping its eye on. So how can the new zoning bylaw help? So as we learned earlier, the current approach of the zoning bylaw segregates activities, which means that in general, commercial activities are separated from residential activities. This can make it difficult for local entrepreneurs to open low-risk businesses like a small cafe, a neighborhood zone for other uses like residential. Narrowly defined or specialized uses can mean the difference between a business being able to open or not. The new bylaw will have broader use categories, which will allow for a greater range of activities in a building or space, and similar activities will be grouped with similar impacts. So as I mentioned, the new bylaw will combine uses into broader use categories, which can allow a greater range of activities to occur in a space like the vacant telephone utility building in Oliver. So when it was redeveloped, it saw this vacant building transformed into a community hub that features a beloved local bakery, a cafe, event space, a microbrewery, and other charming shops run by local entrepreneurs. And as I did mention, a major consideration of this approach to use classes will be land use impact. So what is the impact of the proposed activity on its surroundings? And is the activity different enough or impactful enough to warrant it being regulated differently? Grouping activities with generally similar impacts into fewer use categories will create a more versatile bylaw with fewer barriers to businesses like these opening up within our communities. All right, so thank you so much for staying online and watching our presentation. We'll be hosting sessions on the next batch in October, so stay tuned for more information on that. And again, all of the questions that are submitted in the chat will be compiled and answered and sent back to participants within the next few days. And your questions will also be augmented with the questions from the previous cohort who attended on Wednesday. And our intent is to create a sort of living document, an FAQ about the zoning bylaw renewal that will update through each webinar. And in addition to the questions and answers from this session and the various links promised, I will also send all participants the presentation slides and the recording if they would like to share those materials with their league. And finally, I've included my email on the screen, and please feel free to email me with any questions, comments, or concerns. If you have ideas for future webinars, discussion topics, or suggestions for how we can support leagues in this process, I would love to hear from you. So with that said, have a great afternoon, everyone, and you can expect to hear from me within the next several days.